History classes in school were good for an overview, but today we've got all the shocking goodies you weren't taught, like the real Avengers, death by gold, vampires, and more that are sure to blow your mind. Marcus Licinius Crassus was known as the wealthiest man in Rome throughout his life. The son of a consul of Rome, Crassus fought in the Civil War, played a key part in defeating Spartacus and ending the Third Servile War, and formed the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. Pretty notable. A shrewd man throughout all he did, Crassus accumulated more and more and more wealth, and it was his thirst for wealth that would eventually lead to his downfall. Leading his troops in an ill-fated conquest of Parthia, Crassus and his forces were brutalized and bested by those folks time and time again. After an unsuccessful parley for peace with the leaders, Crassus was killed. How did they do it? The Parthians poured molten gold down his throat as a symbol of his thirst for wealth. Some even say that his gilded head and hands were sent to the Parthian king to keep as trophies of his victory against Crassus and Rome. Granted, this wasn't a unique form of killing someone in history, by the way. In ancient Israel, Mosaic law defined 36 crimes as punishable by death. Those guilty of, let's say, inter-family coitus and adultery with the married daughter of a member of the priesthood were killed by burning from metals, and not by being burnt from the outside, folks. This whole procedure would start by the way of the rope necklace, witnessed by two folks that were integral to the case. It was a soft rope though, because they didn't want to cause any additional suffering with coarse material. Now, when the condemned was gasping for air, you'd pour some molten lead down the throat. So not gold, but similar enough. Crazy this isn't talked about more. When I ask you to think of the Avengers, you're probably picturing Captain America, Iron Man, the Hulk, and the rest of the famous comic book heroes that broke box office records with their movies. But the Avengers was also the name of a group of Jewish folks who hunted Yahtzee war criminals after the mass extinction event of the 1930s and 40s. They poisoned about 2,283 German prisoners of war. Officially known as Nakam, meaning revenge, they were a paramilitary organization of about 50 survivors who, after 1945, sought revenge for the deaths of 6 million Jews. Led by Abba Kovner, the group sought to kill 6 million Germans in a form of indiscriminate revenge, quoting "a nation for a nation." The group's members believed that the defeat of Yahtzee Germany did not mean that Jewish folks were saved from another mass extinction event. The leader believed that a proportional revenge, so killing those 6 million Germans, was the only way to teach enemies that they could not act with impunity, saying the act should be shocking. The Germans should know that there could be no return to normality. According to survivors, the leader's hypnotic eloquence put words to the emotions that they were feeling. Members of the group believed that the laws of time were unable to adequately punish such an extreme event, and the complete moral bankruptcy of the world could be cured by only catastrophic retributive violence. So they targeted German prisoners of war held by the United States military in the American zone. They obtained arsenic locally and infiltrated the bakeries that supplied these prison camps. The conspirators poisoned 3,000 loaves of bread, and it caused a lot of damage. Tucked away in a British newspaper called The Globe in its edition of October 4th of 1920 was this short story with an intriguing headline: "A mock Paris, French plan to hoodwink German raiders." The ruse, as explained in the paper, had only just come to light, and it was almost too fantastical to be true. Camouflage streets, factories, dwelling houses, railways with stations and trains complete, and in fact a camouflaged capital was the gigantic task on which French engineers were engaged when the armistice put an end to military operations, ran the report. It was the brainchild of an electrical engineer called Jacopozzi, a way to draw German aircrafts away from the capital and to fake a city where explosives could fall without causing death and destruction. So how our amazing engineer became involved with the secret project, kind of unclear for obvious reasons. But at some point in late 1917, he was commissioned by the DCA, or the Défense contre Avion, the War Office Department charged with protecting France from air attacks. As outlandish as it might sound to modern minds, the plan made sense at the time. Enemy aircrafts navigated their way to the capital at night, not by technological aids, but by topography. They simply followed the River Seine and then dropped their explosives. But the Seine is a meandering river that, once it cuts through the heart of Paris, under its famous bridges and past landmarks such as the Eiffel Tower, it then doubles back on itself, not once, but twice. kind of like the humps of a camel. It was on the second of these humps, in the suburb of Maison Lafitte, that the French instructed our engineer to construct his phony city. However, there were actually to be two other zones of false objectives. A fake industrial zone would be created at Vers-sur-Marne, situated 10 miles east of the capital, while the suburb of Saint-Denis would be relocated to Villepinte in the northeast. Complete with a duplicate Champs-Élysées and Gare du Nord, this fake Paris was built towards the end of the first big world chaotic event. But then the Germans sued for peace as the city began to take shape, and all of this ingenuity was never put to the test. 100 million years ago, the Sahara Desert was inhabited by galloping crocodiles. Yeah, back then the desert was a lush oasis full of life and predators. In 2009, a paleontological expedition funded by National Geographic uncovered the remains of 5 bizarre crocodile relatives, nicknamed boar croc, duck croc, rat croc, dog croc, and pancake croc. They showed us the great diversity of life that inhabited the area such a long time ago. For starters, the boar croc displayed 3 pairs of huge teeth akin to a boar's tusks, and these teeth were so big that the skull had notches on both the upper and lower jaws, allowing the tusks to pass through when the croc's mouth was closed. The eye sockets were set lower than in modern crocodiles, which have eyes on top of their head to look around the surface while submerged. The 20-foot-long pancake croc was dubbed as such due to its flat, wide jaws. It had small but very numerous teeth lining these jaws, probably used them to set a trap for its prey. Lying motionless for hours underwater with its mouth wide open, this creature would wait for a fish to pass by and then snap its mouth shut, much like the reptilian version of a, people-eating plant. The dog croc seems to have been a very agile runner, with mammal-like teeth and a snout reminiscent of a dog. Ergo, the reasoning for the moniker. Pretty neat. The Tale of Two Lovers, a very lusty novel, was one of the best-selling books of the 15th century. That on its own might not be so shocking, but just give me a moment. It was written by Pope Pius II before he assumed the papacy. This man was an unconventional pope if there ever was one. Before turning to priesthood, he bore descendants out of wedlock, enjoyed the flames of love, and wrote this particular naughty piece of work. The novel is set in Siena, Italy, and centers on the love story of Lucretia, a married woman, and Euryalus, one of the men waiting on the Duke of Austria. After an uncertain beginning, in which each is in love but unaware that it is reciprocated, they begin a correspondence, which takes up much of the rest of the novel. So technically, Washington was not the first president of the United States. Before the United States had the Constitution, which established the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government, they had the Articles of Confederation. Under this legislation, the central authority of the United States was the Second Continental Congress. John Hanson was the first politician elected as president of the Continental Congress, which was technically a largely administrative role. Several other men held the title of president before George Washington's election in 1789. Seeing as the Constitution was ratified in 1787, the math and dates make sense. If you thought ancient Egyptian mummies smelled like rotten decay, you'd be dead wrong. Pun intended. Scientists recreated the embalming fluids used to preserve mummies in ancient Egypt, and apparently it smelled amazing. The dominant aroma is definitely a woody kind of pine-like scent, but it also has a hint of bitumen, a little bit of beeswax, something sweet, and you might even be able to pick up a fresh, citrusy note of pistachio. So it's a very pleasant smell. The team that was in charge of doing all this extrapolated the scent by analyzing the compounds found in the residues of 2 canopic jars, which were vessels used to store a person's mummified organs, from the tomb of a noblewoman called Senetine. They found traces of what they suspect are beeswax, plant oils, fats, a balsamic substance, and various types of tree resins, including cedar and pine. Thomas Edison's contributions to society are equally great and controversial. Some of his 1,000 plus inventions have gone on to shape our lives. However, he is also not the saint of science that some of our school teachers taught in grade school. It's fair to say that Edison was one of the world's most notorious intellectual property thieves. Of the over 1,000 things he smashed a patent on, he stole most of them off of real geniuses like Nikola Tesla, Joseph Swan, the latter of whom originally invented the light bulb. So, our American inventor was a ruthless businessman, opportunist, and had an impressive streak of modifying original inventive ideas. Now, the latter habit was not necessarily always a bad thing. Edison had the impressive ability to take an idea, bring the absolute technological best out of it, make it practical, and in a lot of cases, create something almost magical. In regards to the light bulb, he didn't really create the concept. From all the way back in 1761, people were making incandescent wires, with a handful of inventors not only demonstrating the concept, but patenting various versions of incandescent lights. However, these light bulb precursors lacked two essential Edison ingredients: profitability and practicality. Throw marketability in there too if you'd like. British poet and politician Lord Byron kept a pet bear in his dormitory while studying at Cambridge. Known for being an avid animal lover, when he found out he couldn't bring his dog, he decided to bring a tame bear to live with him on campus instead. He was even known to take it on walks with a leash. Imagine seeing that on campus. And finally, in ancient Greece, they believed redheads became vampires after death. This was partly because redheaded people are very pale-skinned and sensitive to sunlight, unlike the Mediterranean Greeks, who had olive skin and dark features. Well, that's it, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident emo girly. See ya!